Marcus Daniels was minutes away from finalizing the biggest deal of his career, $120 million to SkyWest Airlines, when a flight attendant tapped his shoulder. "Sir, we need this seat for another passenger," she said without apology. He looked up from seat 2A, confused. "I booked this seat weeks ago." Her expression didn't change. "You'll have to move to economy." The first-class cabin went silent. Marcus, a black CEO whose firm managed billions, handed over his boarding pass again. The flight attendant barely looked at it before gesturing to security. Two officers arrived, their hands near their tasers. What they didn't know was that Marcus Daniels wasn't just a passenger. He was the investor whose $25 million payment had cleared moments ago to save the airline from financial collapse. With the calm of a man used to boardrooms, not battles in the sky, he pulled out his phone and reversed the transaction. The seat was gone, but so was their funding. And in just hours, the story would go viral, thrusting Marcus Daniels into the center of a storm that would shake the entire airline industry. Before we dive into this true story of prejudice and power, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more eye-opening stories like this. Marcus Daniels remained seated in first class, gripping his boarding pass with measured calm. The paper bore no errors. It clearly read 2A, his assigned seat. But the flight attendant standing over him seemed determined to erase both the paper and the man holding it. Heather Stevens, a tall blonde with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, tilted her head as if explaining something to a misbehaving child. "We have a VIP who needs this seat, sir. It's important." Marcus responded with clarity, not defiance. "I'm Marcus Daniels, CEO of Pinnacle Investments. This seat was booked weeks ago. I'm on a critical business flight." Heather didn't blink. "I understand, but we're asking for your cooperation." Behind her, a tall white man in a designer overcoat waited impatiently. Richard Whitley. Marcus recognized the name from his research, an aviation consultant with deep ties to SkyWest's boardroom. Whitley stood there as if the seat had always belonged to him. Marcus glanced at the other first-class passengers. Some pretended not to notice. Others watched with mild curiosity. No one intervened. This wasn't their fight. This wasn't their seat. And in their world, it seemed Marcus didn't belong. He felt it all: the dismissal, the coded language, the quiet reinforcement of power. This wasn't just about a chair. This was about place visibility and who got to be seen. But Marcus had built his empire on discipline. From the streets of South Chicago to the executive floors of Manhattan skyscrapers, he'd learned one rule above all: never give them the reaction they expect. So instead of raising his voice, he smiled politely and said, "You'll need to speak with your supervisor." Heather's mask cracked. She hadn't expected resistance, not from him. Minutes later, Bradley Wellington appeared, SkyWest's VP of Operations. Gray hair, double-breasted Navy suit, a man born and raised in old money and older ideas. Bradley didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer his hand. He simply looked at Marcus and said, "We can make this difficult or simple." Marcus calmly replied, "Then let's make it formal. I'd like to speak to the captain." That's when they called security. Two uniformed officers boarded, hands resting near their belts. The passengers leaned in now, intrigued. A few pulled out phones. The spectacle was too rich to ignore. Marcus Daniels, billionaire investor, being escorted from his rightful seat like a trespasser. He stood not out of surrender, but out of strategy. He handed the flight attendant his phone. "You might want to forward this to your accounting department," he said. On the screen was a transaction reversal, $25 million halted. The first installment of Pinnacle's investment gone in a swipe. He turned and walked toward economy class, the silence behind him louder than any protest. Row 34, that's where they placed him. Wedged between two strangers, elbows crushed, knees bent. The woman by the window pulled away, subtly clutching her purse. The man in the aisle gave him a polite nod but offered no space. He was back in the world he'd long thought he'd outgrown, cramped, watched, and unwanted. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus sat motionless, staring forward. He wasn't angry, not visibly. He was calculating, documenting. A quiet fury gathering behind his stillness. Across the aisle, a teenager with AirPods slipped out his phone and started recording. He recognized Marcus Daniels. Everyone did now. Heather passed down the aisle with the drink cart. She handed the man beside Marcus a full can of ginger ale. When Marcus asked for water, she handed him a warm plastic cup half filled. Then she moved on. Not an oversight, a message. Marcus placed the cup on his tray and pulled out his phone. He started a voice memo. SkyWest Airlines Flight 1876. Time 1:18 p.m. Flight attendant Heather Stevens refused to honor my assigned first-class seat in favor of an unlisted VIP. Security was called. No incident, no outburst. I complied and was moved to economy. Luggage rerouted without explanation. He paused, breathed, then added, "This wasn't about policy. This was about perception, about appearance, about power." He ended the recording and saved it. By the time they reached cruising altitude, the story had already begun spreading. Someone in row 3 had uploaded the initial confrontation. Black CEO removed from first class to make room for white VIP, the headline read. By the time Marcus closed his eyes for the first time that flight, the video had 200,000 views. Still no apology, no acknowledgement. But Marcus didn't need an apology. He needed leverage. And now he had it. At 35,000 feet, while SkyWest flight attendants poured champagne for first-class passengers who didn't look like him, Marcus Daniels sat wedged in 34B, knees jammed against a plastic tray table, reading the room the way he always had, not with his eyes, but with instinct. He wasn't supposed to be here, not just physically, but psychologically. The business class demotion wasn't just a seating reassignment, it was a statement, but they didn't know who they'd targeted. Marcus Daniels wasn't a man defined by his seat. He was defined by what he did next. He tapped open his secured investment app and pulled up SkyWest's financials. The $120 million deal on the table wasn't a handout, it was a lifeline. SkyWest was bleeding cash on old aircraft, struggling with route expansion, and failing miserably on ESG compliance. His capital wasn't just preferred, it was vital. And now it was frozen. The seat they stole from him would become the most expensive first-class seat in airline history. The message threads from Pinnacle's boardroom pinged in rapid succession. "Daniels, is this true? We need damage control. Do you want us to pull out completely?" Marcus replied only once. "Hold." The cabin jolted slightly. No turbulence, just a shift in pressure from years of containment releasing in his chest. Marcus knew what came next would require precision. Not rage, strategy. He opened a folder on his tablet titled Restructure, Protocol, SkyWest Contingency. He hadn't drafted it today. He drafted it weeks ago because experience had taught him that prejudice wasn't an aberration. It was architecture. And if you were going to tear it down, you needed a blueprint. Across the aisle, a woman who had watched the earlier confrontation leaned in slightly. "Excuse me," she whispered. "Are you Marcus Daniels?" He looked at her, offered a slight nod. She hesitated. "That was wrong. What they did, I saw it." "I appreciate that," he replied. "I recorded some of it," she added, "if it helps." Marcus' expression shifted. "That could be very helpful." She airdropped the video. It showed him calmly presenting his boarding pass, Heather's repeated refusals the moment security approached, and the visible discomfort of nearby passengers. But most importantly, it showed the contrast calm professionalism versus orchestrated removal. He filed it under Exhibit A. The plane began descent. His suit wrinkled. No clean clothes, no presentation folder. But as far as Marcus was concerned, he had everything he needed. The airport terminal buzzed with business travelers and vacationers, all unaware that within its walls, a corporate war had already begun. As Marcus exited the plane, Richard Whitley strutted behind him, rolling a designer briefcase. He gave Marcus a smirk. "No hard feelings, right? Some of us are just better suited for certain seats." Marcus stopped, turned, and gave Richard the kind of look that CEOs reserve for final boardroom showdowns. "You'll remember this moment," he said, his voice calm. "Not because of the seat, but because of what it cost you." Richard laughed. "Cost me?" Marcus smiled. "Enjoy your seat. I just froze the $120 million that kept this airline in the air." Richard's eyes twitched. Marcus walked on. Outside, a black SUV waited. Not because of prestige, but because Marcus planned for contingencies. Always. Inside the vehicle, Aisha Robinson, Pinnacle's COO, was already on the phone. "I've spoken to legal. We have leeway to delay final funding for 72 hours without breaching contract." But after that, Marcus cut in. "We don't delay." Aisha frowned. "You want to release the funds?" "No," Marcus replied. "We release a statement." He drafted it on the spot. Pinnacle Investments has temporarily halted its capital deployment to SkyWest Airlines following an incident involving one of our executives. While we remain committed to industry transformation, we will not fund institutions that fail to meet basic standards of equity and inclusion. We will reevaluate our position after a full review. He hit send. By the time they arrived at the hotel, the airline's stock had dipped 2.3%, nothing alarming yet. Inside his suite, Marcus pulled off his tie and sat at the desk rolling up his sleeves. His assistant forwarded internal SkyWest documents, VIP passenger protocols, seating escalation flowcharts, and suspiciously redacted email chains referencing special comfort arrangements. Then came the call. Walter Kingston, SkyWest CEO. Marcus Walter began trying too hard to sound casual. I just heard an unfortunate misunderstanding on your flight. Marcus didn't respond. We appreciate your patience, and I'm sure the crew had their reasons. Marcus cut in. The reason was racism, Walter. The reason was your VP of operations thinking I didn't belong in a space I paid for. There was silence on the line. I'll be in your boardroom tomorrow, Marcus said, but we won't be discussing capital. We'll be discussing compliance with federal discrimination laws. Walter cleared his throat. This is all a bit dramatic, don't you think? No, Marcus replied. Dramatic is what happens when systems think they're untouchable. He ended the call. Then he called his tech team. I want every flight discrimination case SkyWest has settled in the past 10 years. And I want their diversity numbers on every board member and executive position. Get me everything. Quietly. Aisha stepped in from the adjoining room. You're escalating this. No, Marcus said. I'm unveiling it. The next morning, a trending hashtag emerged. Black CEO in 34B, and the world began paying attention. The SkyWest executive floor smelled like fresh carpet and stale excuses. Marcus Daniels stepped out of the private elevator flanked by Aisha Robinson and James Chen, his general counsel. The receptionist's eyes widened for a second, just enough for Marcus to register it. She hadn't expected him to be the man in the news. That was the point. The conference room was glass-walled, sleek, and silent. At the head of the table sat Walter Kingston, CEO, seasoned, silver-haired, and visibly rattled. Beside him, Bradley Wellington, VP of Operations, sat with that forced smile rich men wear when they think they still control the boardroom. Marcus Walter said, standing, "We're so glad you came." Marcus didn't shake his hand. "Let's begin." Bradley gestured to a seat at the far end. "We prepared a chair for you." Marcus took the head seat. "I'm not here to be managed," he said evenly. "I'm here to evaluate the structural integrity of an organization asking for $120 million to my firm's capital." Walter raised a hand. "Let's not escalate." "I'm not escalating," Marcus replied. "I'm auditing." The room fell still. Aisha slid open her laptop and began screen-sharing data across the wall display. "What you're looking at," she began, "is a 10-year summary of SkyWest's executive promotions. Out of 117 senior-level appointments, only 3 were people of color. None remained longer than 18 months. Bradley shifted in his seat. James added, "Of the 42 discrimination complaints filed by employees since 2014, 39 were settled quietly out of court. The rest disappeared internally." Walter looked uncomfortable. "This isn't productive." "No," Marcus cut in. "It's finally honest. You brought me here for capital. You pitched diversity as part of your value proposition to Pinnacle. But what we're seeing is a company built on exclusion, not equity." Bradley leaned forward, voice slick. "We don't tolerate discrimination." "What happened on that flight was the tip of your iceberg," Marcus finished. "We know about your seating reassignment program. The passenger reclassification codes. The internal note referring to me as ineligible for priority optics." Aisha clicked forward. A redacted internal memo flashed on screen. "These are your words, Mr. Wellington," she said. "You directed staff to ensure comfort calibration and premium cabins translation make first class look a certain way." Bradley turned red. Those phrases were taken out of context. "No," Marcus said quietly. "They're the context." James pulled up another file. "You personally intervened in my client's seating according to witness statements and digital logs. And you instructed security to remove him with armed officers while he was in full compliance with his ticket." Walter tried to salvage the moment. "We are committed to learning from this." "Learning?" Marcus's voice sharpened. You're a Fortune 500 company, not a freshman civics class. Learning time is over. Bradley's tone turned defensive. This is a coordinated attack to discredit our brand during sensitive negotiations. Marcus fixed his gaze on him. No, Mr. Wellington, what you're experiencing is sunlight. And sunlight doesn't attack, it reveals. The next slide displayed social media fallout. Black CEO in 34B, trending in 12 countries. Over 9 million views of the original flight video. 3 major corporate clients suspending SkyWest contracts pending internal review. 6-point drop in stock value within 48 hours. Walter swallowed hard. What exactly do you want? James spoke now, firm and measured. Here are our revised conditions for investment. The removal of Bradley Wellington effective immediately. Establishment of an independent anti-discrimination oversight council. Mandatory equity audits across hiring promotions and passenger treatment. A seat for Pinnacle on your board with voting rights over ethics and operations. A formal public apology acknowledging systemic failures, not miscommunication or incident. Bradley stood, fists clenched. You can't dictate our leadership. Marcus stood too. I can. Because your airline doesn't get a dime without meeting every condition. Bradley turned to Walter. We should end this meeting. He's grandstanding. No, Walter said slowly. He's negotiating. He looked back at Marcus. Can I have 24 hours? Marcus gave a tight nod. You have 12. He turned his team following. Outside the glass walls, staff had gathered receptionists, assistants, interns, all pretending not to watch. But they were watching. And Marcus knew the real power wasn't in the room he just left. It was in the hallway where change begins silently. Back in the SUV, Aisha handed Marcus a secure tablet. We got the HR leaks. Anonymous drop. He opened the file. Emails, dozens. One from Bradley, move him to economy. This is not the optics we want in 2A. Tell security if needed. Another more chilling. We've reassigned 3 passengers this month using the C-Optic code. Management is pleased. C-Optic Comfort Optics. A code for discrimination. Marcus leaned back, watching the skyline blur past. Get this ready for the media, he said, but not until I say go. James looked up, waiting for what. Marcus smiled faintly, for them to make one final mistake. The next morning they did. Bradley issued a company-wide email denying any wrongdoing, calling Marcus a disruptive passenger with a personal agenda. And just like that, Marcus had everything he needed. The system had shown its rot. Now it was time to expose it. The morning began with a storm, not of rain, but of messages, media requests, and legal alerts. By 8:30 a.m., Marcus Daniels' inbox was a battlefield. News outlets wanted interviews. Civil rights groups were requesting statements. And internally, his team had flagged something unexpected. Employee unrest at SkyWest was quietly erupting into something harder to contain: conscience. The anonymous HR leak had gone viral overnight. Whistleblower emails showing coded language. C-Optic for black and brown passengers. Priv-Cal for privilege calibration based on perceived social class, and most damning of all, seat reclamation procedures triggered widespread outrage online. One headline summed it up perfectly. First class for the few SkyWest secret passenger profiling exposed. By mid-morning, employees began coming forward. One by one, staff who'd worked under Bradley Wellington's operations umbrella started sharing their stories. It wasn't just Marcus's humiliation they were reacting to. It was the pattern they now realized had long been institutional. The first to speak publicly was Jasmine Tron, a former flight supervisor who left the company after her promotion was revoked without explanation. She appeared on a live Zoom panel organized last minute by a diversity coalition, voice shaking but determined. I used to think the problem was just me, she confessed, that I wasn't assertive enough, that I needed more certifications. But seeing that email from Bradley, now I know. It was never about performance. It was about control. Dozens watched live. Thousands replayed the clip within hours. By noon, 2 more ex-employees joined Daniel Okoye, an IT contractor who'd flagged irregular passenger flagging patterns, and Rosa Delgado, a former gate agent who once questioned a reassignment directive and was demoted the next week. Rosa didn't mince words. I saw Marcus Daniels walk onto that plane. I was working the gate. His ticket was legitimate. His demeanor was respectful. What they did to him wasn't customer service, it was discrimination disguised in protocol. Marcus watched the clips unfold from his command center, a private suite converted into a digital war room. He looked at Aisha. We've hit the inflection point. She nodded. The walls are cracking. James Chen entered with a new development. You need to see this. He turned the monitor. A fresh video, unverified but explosive, showed two SkyWest employees in the galley whispering after Marcus had been removed. Bradley said he didn't want him in 2A, one voice said clearly. Told Heather it was for passenger optics. I told her that was risky. The other interrupted. She's scared, but she did it. She always does what Bradley says. James hit pause. The upload location matches an internal Wi-Fi ping from gate G11 confirmed timestamp. Anonymous but real. Isha leaned in. You think Heather Stevens is ready to flip? Marcus narrowed his eyes. I think she already has. She just doesn't know it yet. Across the city, Heather Stevens sat in her tiny apartment, curtains drawn, phone off. She hadn't slept. The messages from SkyWest's legal department had been relentless. You are not authorized to comment on internal procedures. Any deviation from official statements will result in termination. Reminder your employment contract includes arbitration clauses and NDAs. But something inside Heather had shifted. The moment Marcus stood and calmly requested her employee ID after she'd humiliated him in front of a cabin of silent witnesses haunted her. She wasn't new. She'd flown 12 years. But never had she felt like a weapon wielded for someone else's bias. And now, as more stories came out, Jasmine Daniel Rosa, she felt the weight of her silence becoming complicity. The knock at her door was soft. Heather froze. When she opened it, a young woman in plain clothes stood holding a manila envelope. Ms. Stevens, this is for you, inside a printed copy of the C-Optic memo, circled in red her own initials as the approving crew member. There was no note, no threat, just a mirror. At the bottom, someone had written in pen, they'll protect themselves, will you? That afternoon, she called the one number she never thought she'd dial, James Chen. Marcus answered. I want to talk, she whispered, but I need protection. You'll have it, he said instantly. You won't be alone. Back at the command center, Marcus convened his team. We're entering the witness phase, he announced. No more data dumps, no more documents. From now on, it's human stories. The people behind the silence. Aisha already had a plan. We've lined up a documentary producer. Independent, no flashy editing, no spin, just the truth as told by the people who lived it. Marcus nodded. This is no longer just about one airline. It's a blueprint for what accountability can look like. James added, and we have legal safe harbor set up for any whistleblower who comes forward. Pro bono representation, whistleblower protections, even relocation if necessary. Marcus sat back, eyes focused. Good. Because when a system begins to rot, it doesn't fall from a single blow, it collapses under the weight of all the people it crushed on the way up. That evening, Heather Stevens sat down in a secure location with a camera in front of her. She took a breath. And then she began. My name is Heather Stevens. I've worked at SkyWest Airlines for 12 years, and I'm here to tell the truth about what happened to Marcus Daniels and what's been happening for far too long. By the time Heather Stevens' video confession reached the public, it had already been authenticated, encrypted, and legally fortified by Marcus Daniels' legal team. No chance for retraction. No opportunity for SkyWest to spin it. The tape was real, the voice was hers. And the story was damning. Within 24 hours, over 2.3 million views had stacked across independent news platforms and social media clips. Heather's voice shook as she recounted Bradley Wellington's orders, the coded language, the pressure, and the fear. We were told to make it seem procedural, but it wasn't. We had orders, specific names, even seat numbers. They called it seat reclamation. I called it wrong. The ripple effects were immediate and violent. SkyWest Public Relations Department released a carefully sanitized statement that evening claiming Heather's testimony was concerning and would be taken seriously. But no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no mention of Marcus. Behind the scenes, however, it was chaos. Bradley Wellington convened an emergency executive meeting. She's unstable, he barked. Disgruntled employee trying to extort severance. But even the boardroom wasn't buying it anymore. Sandra Reeves had seen the video. She didn't look unstable, she said, leveling her voice across the marble conference table. She looked guilty. And that guilt is something this board should finally listen to. In a parallel meeting room 5 floors away, Marcus and his inner circle had mobilized a new offensive, Operation Paper Trail. "Every system leaves a shadow," said Rahul Singh, Pinnacle's cybersecurity lead, flipping through screenshots of internal SkyWest flight logs. "Watch this." He pointed to a pattern that had eluded even seasoned auditors. For nearly 3 years, select first-class passengers, mostly black or brown, had been reaccommodated after final boarding in favor of longtime platinum members. Rahul tapped his screen. Here's where it gets interesting. The reassigned passengers weren't disruptive. In fact, most Marcus Daniels didn't need the media anymore. He had the facts, he had the testimonies, and now he had the data. 3 days after Heather Stevens' viral confession, Marcus stood in a dimly lit ballroom at the International Ethics and Business Summit in Washington, D.C., surrounded by executives, journalists, regulators, and 2 key witnesses flown in under private security, Heather Stevens and Lisa Corman. The room was filled with tension, not the kind that stifled it, electrified. Everyone there knew something was about to detonate. The event, scheduled originally for a panel on sustainable investment, had been overtaken by breaking headlines. SkyWest VP caught orchestrating discriminatory reassignment program, and insiders confirm corporate cover-up. Flight crew witnesses speak out. Marcus was the final speaker of the night. He didn't come to make small talk. He came to make history. Walking onto the stage without notes, he began calmly. "I didn't want to be here tonight, not like this. I wanted to be preparing for another investment cycle, another portfolio review. But I'm here because of a simple fact: discrimination disguised as policy is still discrimination." A hush rippled through the room. 3 weeks ago, I was removed from a seat I paid for after closing a $120 million deal with the airline doing the removing. And they thought I would stay silent, that I would protect the deal more than I'd protect my dignity. The screen behind him lit up with evidence seat reassignment data, color-coded passenger tracking, digital audits showing repeated patterns. They called it seat optimization. But every algorithm has a designer, and every pattern has a purpose. The second screen activated. A transcript appeared, Heather's voice confirming Bradley's order. "Make sure he's out of 2A. Richard doesn't want to sit next to him. Use the manual override if you have to." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Phones lit up. Live stream viewers surged past 1.5 million in under 10 minutes. Marcus pressed forward. What happened on SkyWest Flight 1876 wasn't an accident. It was a choice, and when systems make choices like that repeatedly, it's not bad luck. It's policy. Backstage, Walter Kingston watched the feed on a private monitor. His hands shook. Bradley Wellington, seated 2 rows away, leaned forward, eyes hollow. No amount of PR coaching could prepare them for what came next. Marcus turned to the crowd. "But this isn't just about me. This is about every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Every executive mistaken for staff. Every professional questioned for existing in elite spaces." He paused. "Tonight I'm releasing the full documentation. To the Department of Transportation. To the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. To the Department of Justice." A murmur of shocked approval swept through the hall. SkyWest has 48 hours to comply with the following demands: permanent removal of Bradley Wellington from all leadership roles, full public disclosure of passenger reallocation policies for the last 5 years, independent oversight of anti-discrimination reform, and restitution for affected passengers. He looked into the camera. "Fail to act, and the lawsuits will begin. Not just mine, but class action. Federal, civil, shareholder." He stepped back, face composed, voice calm. "You can't diversity train your way out of this. You can't PR spin equity. You have to fix it or be dismantled by the people who once believed in you." Applause exploded across the ballroom. Backstage, Kingston called for his driver. Bradley slipped out the side exit into a swarm of reporters. No comment, no smile, no control. The next morning, CNN, Forbes, and the New York Times ran full-page headlines. Marcus Daniels demands corporate reckoning. Data proves discrimination was policy. Social media trended with Flight 1876, Truth We Belong. In first, dismantle the policy. By noon, 4 former SkyWest employees contacted Marcus' legal team with similar experiences. A federal investigation was formally announced. SkyWest's board scheduled an emergency vote. Bradley Wellington's badge access was revoked by 3:47 p.m. The airline released a terse statement. Effective immediately, Mr. Wellington is no longer affiliated with SkyWest Airlines. We are cooperating with all ongoing investigations. But Marcus wasn't done. He convened a press call the next day not to celebrate, but to warn. Removing one person doesn't erase a culture. It just opens the door. We're walking through it. A new fund was announced, the Corporate Equity Enforcement Trust, seeded with $10 million of Marcus-owned capital to support whistleblowers across industries. Justice had made landfall, but the storm was just beginning. The winds of accountability were no longer whispers, they were a full-blown reckoning. By Tuesday morning, the FAA had announced a surprise inspection audit of SkyWest's internal compliance processes. That same afternoon, two senior compliance officers at SkyWest tendered their resignations. Quietly, no press releases, no goodbyes. They knew what was coming. Marcus Daniels wasn't just targeting the visible offenders. He was dismantling the fortress brick by brick. At 9:03 a.m., a sealed subpoena was delivered to SkyWest's legal department. Federal investigators now had grounds to request all internal communications referencing passenger reassignment, customer comfort coding, and appearance-based adjustments. The audit trail led directly to Bradley Wellington. But the real shock came at 11:41 a.m. when CNBC broke the exclusive internal memos reveal top executives knew of discriminatory reassignment protocols since 2017. The article included screenshots of emails, board minutes, and a memo authored by Walter Kingston himself praising the optics management strategy for keeping premium cabin demographics in line with brand expectations. The implications were devastating. The airline's entire senior leadership was now exposed. Kingston's team scrambled to contain the fallout, but it was too late. Congressional aides began calling Marcus's office. By noon, Senator Angela Knox, chair of the Transportation Oversight Committee, had issued a statement demanding a full congressional hearing into racial discrimination in commercial aviation with SkyWest executives subpoenaed. That same day, Marcus met quietly in a downtown law firm with representatives from the National Aviation Workers Alliance. They presented him with testimonies from 26 flight attendants, gate agents, and mid-level managers who had either witnessed or been coerced into discriminatory acts under threat of demotion. Marcus listened, took notes, and promised legal support for all of them. No more fear, he told them. You will not be silenced again. Meanwhile, SkyWest stock was in free fall, down 19% in 72 hours. Hedge funds began dumping shares. Three major corporate clients, including a Fortune 100 law firm and a medical technology giant, suspended their travel accounts. The damage now exceeded $1.2 billion in a market cap loss. Walter Kingston made one last attempt at damage control. He appeared on Bloomberg in a live interview, solemn and polished. SkyWest is committed to healing. We have removed the individual responsible and are working with external partners to review and rebuild. But the host, emboldened by the documents released by Marcus's team, didn't let him off easy. Mr. Kingston, why did you personally authorize demographic flight assignments as early as 2018? And why was your memo titled the Comfort Composition Initiative? Kingston faltered for the first time in his public career. The clip went viral. Back at Pinnacle's temporary war room, Marcus watched in silence. Then he turned to James Chen, his legal counsel. He's just admitted culpability on live television. Do we file criminal referrals now? James nodded, already drafted. They'll be with the U.S. Attorney's Office in an hour. By Wednesday, the Department of Justice officially confirmed they had opened a civil rights investigation into SkyWest Airlines, citing credible evidence of widespread and systematic discrimination facilitated by senior leadership. The boardroom at SkyWest was in chaos. 3 board members resigned under pressure. The airline's general counsel was placed on administrative leave. Internal communications leaked to the press revealed that employees were told to scrub references to appearance coding from all documentation systems. But whistleblowers had already archived everything. Then came the leak that shifted public sentiment from outrage to national debate. SkyWest used facial recognition to flag non-conforming first-class passengers. The program, allegedly piloted at select airports, used AI-assisted tools to assess passenger demographics based on facial data and reroute them for secondary verification. Privacy groups erupted. Senators demanded immediate cessation. Civil rights lawyers threatened lawsuits not just for discrimination, but for biometric privacy violations. Marcus's foundation filed a joint complaint with the ACLU. Meanwhile, Heather Stevens, now under protection, joined a televised town hall discussion with Lisa Corman, moderated by Don Lemon. The women shared their experiences, their fears, and how the system had nearly crushed them into silence. They used our professionalism against us, Heather said. Told us it was just policy, that we were imagining it. But when enough people imagine the same thing, it's real. Marcus watched from backstage. He had been invited as the final guest. When he joined the segment, the crowd applauded not just for his legal strategy, but for his courage in using power differently. Don turned to him. "Mr. Daniels, they've fired Bradley. They're investigating Walter. The system is cracking." "But what's the end game here?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "The end game isn't just justice, it's prevention. I don't want another kid from the South Side to build a billion-dollar firm and still be told they don't belong in first class." That clip aired across every major network. That night, under pressure from investors and regulators, the entire SkyWest board voted to place Walter Kingston on indefinite suspension pending investigation. The chairman's seat was empty for the first time in 14 years, and Marcus Daniels wasn't done. He was preparing to fill it. In the hushed stillness of the 38th floor boardroom, sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the chrome lettering above the glass wall, SkyWest Airlines Executive Boardroom. That morning, for the first time in the company's history, an emergency shareholder vote was held not in secrecy, but under full public scrutiny. News cameras lined the lobby below. Activists gathered outside. Civil rights groups were live streaming their coverage. The world was watching. Marcus Daniels arrived precisely at 9:00 a.m. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and no tie, a silent statement of control. He was no longer the man quietly humiliated in seat 2A. He walked through the security checkpoint without stopping. The same guard who once questioned his identity now nodded respectfully, opening the doors without hesitation. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Half the board had been reshuffled. SkyWest's legal counsel sat silently at the far end, eyes down. Sandra Reeves, interim CEO, stood to welcome Marcus and his team. "Thank you for being here," she said with sincerity. "We have a lot of ground to cover, but first the shareholders would like to hear directly from you." Marcus took his seat. Then he stood again. He didn't need a microphone. 3 months ago, he began, "I boarded your plane as your largest prospective investor and was told without apology that I didn't belong. That moment was not a misunderstanding. It was the result of a culture you created, allowed, and monetized." Silence gripped the room. I don't need to recount the humiliation. It's documented. What I want to discuss today is what comes next and whether this company deserves to continue operating under the same structures that allowed that humiliation to happen. He held up a leather-bound folder, Pinnacle Proposal for Equity-Driven Governance Reform. It contained everything: structural audit, data board restructuring models, employee pipeline diversity programs, customer rights standards, and legal compliance blueprints based on federal consent decree frameworks. "Change isn't optional anymore," Marcus continued. "It's overdue, and it must be enforceable." Sandra Reeves opened the floor for deliberation. One by one, the remaining board members flipped through the proposal. Their expressions varied, some grim, some thoughtful, some ashamed. One asked, "Are we still negotiating terms?" Marcus shook his head gently. "No, I've already made the investment. What I'm offering now is direction. Accept it, or I withdraw permanently, and what follows will be class action lawsuits, regulatory sanctions, and the collapse of your remaining brand equity." By noon, the board had voted, unanimous. Pinnacle Investments was granted 2 permanent seats on the board, a mandate to oversee all diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) functions, and co-governance over a new SkyWest Ethics Council. The council would operate independently with subpoena power and the right to escalate cases to federal authorities when internal remedies failed. The next day, Marcus was sworn in as chairman of that council. The announcement reverberated across the industry. Other airlines immediately began reevaluating their internal policies. Executives from Delta, American, and United quietly reached out to Pinnacle for consultation opportunities. Within weeks, the FAA announced a new initiative, the Equity in Aviation Task Force, with Marcus named to its advisory board. But not everyone welcomed the transformation. Bradley Wellington's allies within the aviation industry, Those with vested interests in preserving the old structures began pushing back through editorials, op-eds, and political lobbying. Merit is under attack, one headline read. Activist investors threaten efficiency, said another. Marcus didn't respond to any of them. Instead, he launched a program called Open Skies, a $10 million fund administered by the Corporate Accountability Foundation to train and mentor underrepresented pilots, flight attendants, and operations leaders. The first cohort included 47 candidates, many of them first-generation college graduates, all of them inspired by what they saw unfold in the media. That same week, SkyWest hosted its first-ever Passengers of Dignity town hall. Dozens of past victims of discrimination were invited back this time to speak not to customer service reps, but directly to executives, policy architects, and training designers. The sessions were raw, unfiltered, transformational. One woman, a retired professor, had been removed from first class for not looking like her ID photo. She shared her story with quiet dignity. Another man, a software engineer, described being asked 3 times if his seat assignment was correct. Their stories mirrored Marcus' own. But now, for the first time, the institution was listening. Behind the scenes, the FBI's case against Bradley Wellington intensified. New charges emerged: financial fraud, falsified employee reviews, unauthorized data access. He was indicted on 12 counts and faced up to 35 years in prison. Walter Kingston, cornered by mounting evidence and witness testimony, accepted a deal: public resignation in exchange for limited immunity. SkyWest's culture didn't just shift, it shattered and rebuilt. Heather Stevens was appointed VP of Inclusive Operations. Lisa Corman led a new ethics compliance unit. And Marcus, he made a quiet visit back to Seat 2A on a routine cross-country flight, not as an investor, not as an executive, but as a citizen. As he sat, a flight attendant approached. "Mr. Daniels," she said with a genuine smile, "it's good to have you back. First class won't ever forget who helped fix it." Marcus nodded, once looked out the window and whispered to himself, "Not fixed, just getting started." The ruling came down exactly as Marcus had anticipated. Judge Harrington ordered the immediate release of the $25 million investment to SkyWest and imposed punitive damages against Pinnacle for what the court described as contractual sabotage. His opinion read more like a public relations memo than a legal decision, dismissing the discrimination claims as inconclusive and describing Marcus's actions as calculated leverage tactics unbecoming of a corporate leader. Outside the courthouse, Bradley Wellington appeared on camera, smiling with rehearsed humility, proclaiming SkyWest's vindication. "The court has spoken," he told reporters. "We look forward to restoring focus on what truly matters: our passengers and our mission of service." Marcus Daniels stood in the background, expression unreadable. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. The wheels he had set in motion were already moving far beyond the jurisdiction of one courtroom or one corrupt judge. In the war room back at Pinnacle, James Chen closed the live stream of the court announcement. "It's rigged top to bottom," he said, "but the record is ours. We've laid every piece of groundwork for the appeal, and more importantly, for the exposure." Aisha chimed in from the corner. "Bradley and Harrington may think they won today, but they just gave us the biggest story in the country." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the truth in their words. "They needed a win so badly they exposed their entire network to get it," he said. "The judge, the fabricated documents, the arbitrary disqualifications, it's all on the record now." Heather Stevens, who had been watching silently from the back of the room, stood and stepped forward. "I'm ready," she said, eyes steady. "Lisa, too, will testify publicly." Marcus turned toward her, moved by the weight of that choice. "Are you sure they'll come at you harder now?" She hesitated only a second. "They already have. But if I stay silent, I'm part of it." Marcus reached for a folder on the table, the file labeled Harrington Wellington. Dozens of pages detailing their connections, country club memberships, financial favors, photos, text messages. "Then let's finish what they started," he said. That night, the team compiled an airtight complaint to submit to the Judicial Ethics Commission. The documentation exposed Judge Harrington's son's internship under Bradley's department, shared vacations, private correspondence, discussing the Daniels case weeks before the hearing, proof that the system was bent and who bent it. Meanwhile, news of the ruling sparked debate across the country. Some took SkyWest's side, echoing Harrington's rhetoric about weaponized victimhood. Others were incensed by the transparent miscarriage of justice, The optics of a black CEO humiliated, then punished for defending his dignity. The internet didn't sleep. Side-by-side video breakdowns comparing Marcus's calm behavior with the judge's biased language went viral. Political commentators debated judicial ethics. Legal scholars picked apart Harrington's ruling, finding it riddled with logical inconsistencies. By morning, the Judicial Ethics Commission had already scheduled a preliminary inquiry. Independent journalists uncovered that SkyWest's general counsel had contributed heavily to Harrington's last reappointment campaign. Calls for the judge's recusal surged, but Marcus didn't rest on outrage. While others watched the headlines, he moved quietly. He met with civil rights attorneys. He briefed his board. He made calls to institutional investors not to seek sympathy but to outline the broader strategy. This isn't just about a contract, he said. It's about corporate accountability in industries that have never had to answer to people like us. The next 72 hours would test everything. Media attention was spiking again. Financial analysts had noted that SkyWest's stock bump after the ruling had already reversed too many unresolved questions, too much reputational risk. And then came the leak. Someone inside the court system, an anonymous source, sent Marcus's legal team a confidential memo. Harrington had received a sealed letter from a senior judicial review officer warning him that his connections to Wellington presented an appearance of impropriety. The judge had ignored it. The document broke everything open. It didn't reverse the ruling, not yet. But it validated Marcus' claim the system wasn't just biased, it was complicit. Sitting in his private office overlooking the Hudson, Marcus didn't celebrate. He stared at the screen where the leaked letter now blazed across every major news outlet. "You were right," Aisha said, entering quietly. Marcus gave a weary nod. "Being right isn't enough. We have to be undeniable." She sat across from him. "The next part, the exposure, the real accountability. Are you ready for what that will cost?" Marcus looked down at his hands, steady, calloused by a lifetime of restraint. "It already cost me everything that should have protected me," he said quietly. "Now it's time for it to cost them. No calls for boycotts, no fiery monologues, just a silent reckoning, building momentum beneath every headline." The ruling may have favored SkyWest, but the court of public consequence was just getting started. The sun had barely risen when a courier arrived at SkyWest headquarters, delivering an envelope with no return address. Inside, a printed copy of the Judicial Ethics Commission's internal warning about Judge Harrington's conflict of interest, now made public. Along with it, a single-typed sentence: "This is only the beginning." Sandra Reeves, the most senior board member, held the page in trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the faces around the table. Walter Kingston, stone-faced the general counsel, visibly rattled, and Bradley Wellington nowhere to be seen. "This is a time bomb," she said flatly. "Damage control," Kingston snapped. "We get ahead of the narrative." The judge acted independently. "We had no knowledge, Walter," she cut in. "We all saw the email threads. You knew exactly who was presiding. And now it's all over CNN." Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Daniels and his team had established a secure war room within a converted penthouse office. Glass walls, blackout shades, and soundproofing turned it into a fortress of strategy. James Chen paced near a whiteboard filled with timelines and cascading arrows, media releases, legal filings, shareholder interventions, and SEC coordination. "Our next move is external," Marcus said, eyes fixed on a live news feed. "They're circling their wagons. It's time to go straight to the people." Aisha tapped her tablet and a prototype site loaded: accountableairlines.org. The homepage featured videos of SkyWest employees anonymously recounting years of internal bias, some in voice-only confessionals, others with faces blurred. Each story validated Marcus's claim this wasn't a one-off humiliation, it was systemic. That afternoon, the website went live. It spread like wildfire. Whistleblower testimonials flooded in. Customers shared photos of altered boarding passes, discriminatory reassignments, even a few physical altercations during seating disputes. One video of a Filipino nurse asked to move to coach to accommodate a regular customer garnered over 4 million views in under 12 hours. SkyWest stock tumbled again. But behind closed doors, Bradley Wellington was unraveling. Trapped in his office with security stationed outside per instructions from the board, he spent hours on the phone with his personal attorneys, shredding paper documents between calls. When they informed him that the FBI had now subpoenaed Clearview Securities, his voice cracked. They can't tie it back to me, he insisted. They won't. But deep down, he knew. The evidence was already tied with a bow. At Pinnacle's office, Marcus reviewed the newest affidavit from Lisa Corman, the second flight attendant, detailing not only Bradley's intimidation, but how management regularly coached crew to de-escalate diversity optics in premium cabins. It was a sanitized term, but the intent was poisonous. Move the black and brown passengers before anyone noticed. James leaned in. This language isn't just damning, it's a smoking gun. Later that evening, Heather Stevens appeared in her first live interview on MSNBC. The studio was quiet, the lighting soft. Heather sat upright, hands folded in her lap, voice calm but resolute. They told us who to make comfortable. They never said it directly, but we knew she said. And when Mr. Daniels boarded that plane, I was instructed to make it work, which meant move him for someone else, because of how he looked. When asked what she hoped would come of her testimony, Heather didn't hesitate. I hope people stop pretending this isn't happening every day. And I hope SkyWest finally starts treating people like humans, not demographics. Back at SkyWest, Sandra Reeves called an emergency board vote. We have two problems, she told them. A cultural cancer we failed to excise, and a man we treated like a threat when he was our best chance at salvation. The board voted unanimously to suspend Bradley Wellington pending federal investigation. His access was revoked within the hour. By morning, an arrest warrant had been issued, but Marcus wasn't finished. He released a letter personal, deliberate, and devastating. Addressed to the American public and published in the New York Times, it began, I boarded that flight as a CEO. I left it as a case file, but I'm not interested in retribution. I'm interested in reconstruction. The letter outlined a national initiative, a coalition of investors, regulators, and civil rights leaders to enforce anti-discrimination protocols across transportation industries. Not just in airlines, but in rail, hospitality, finance, and beyond. By midnight, over 80 CEOs had signed on. And while SkyWest scrambled to recover Pinnacle's brand soared to new heights. New partnerships formed overnight. Clients who once hesitated now rushed forward. Even the White House issued a statement praising Marcus's vision and urging other companies to follow suit. He had turned humiliation into leadership, discrimination into transformation. The story was no longer just about a man removed from his seat. It was about what happens when the one they tried to remove refuses to stay silent. The morning after Marcus' open letter to the nation, the Wall Street Journal ran a headline that sent shockwaves through every C-suite in the country. Pinnacle CEO launches Corporate Accountability Coalition. 83 companies joined in 24 hours. CNBC aired live coverage outside Pinnacle's headquarters. Protesters and supporters gathered some holding signs that read, "This is bigger than one seat." Others simply wearing shirts with Marcus's face and the word unbought. Inside Pinnacle's war room, Aisha Robinson updated the team on coalition developments. Ford, Delta, Bank of America, all signed on this morning, she reported. They're committing to third-party audits and internal reporting transparency. James Chen followed. DOJ just acknowledged receipt of our second evidentiary package. The SEC is formally investigating both SkyWest and Clearview Securities. And Marcus, we just got word the Senate Commerce Committee wants you to testify next week on racial equity in transportation. Marcus absorbed the moment. It wasn't just vindication, it was amplification. His fight was being institutionalized, and that meant the system would be forced to face its own reflection. But the deeper they dug, the more rot they found. Rahul, their cybersecurity lead, walked to the screen and pulled up a heat map of compromised systems within SkyWest. Bradley used vendor relationships to insert spyware across operational departments. We've isolated payment fraud, racial passenger, flagging scripts, even unethical facial profiling for VIP comfort. This wasn't negligence, it was design. Marcus didn't blink. Send the data directly to DOJ Cybercrimes and prep a simplified version for the press. Let the public see it too. Elsewhere, SkyWest reeled. Bradley Wellington had been arrested at his home at 4:23 a.m., barefoot in a silk robe as agents executed a no-knock warrant. He was booked on charges of corporate espionage, witness, tampering, obstruction of justice, and wire fraud. The news stations played the footage on a loop. Gone was the tailored arrogance. In its place, a pale, shrunken man escorted by federal agents into a black SUV. But SkyWest problems weren't over. Sandra Reeves summoned the remaining board members for an emergency restructuring session. The firm they had spent decades protecting was now hemorrhaging brand equity, institutional clients, and public trust. Our survival, she told them, bluntly depends on one thing: handing over governance control to the man we tried to eject. The proposal was unprecedented, a formal offer for Marcus Daniels to become executive chairman of SkyWest Airlines with sweeping authority to restructure leadership, ethics, and compliance from the ground up. Not just a seat at the table, control of the table itself. That evening, Sandra arrived at Pinnacle, document folder in hand. Marcus met her in the executive lounge. No handshakes, just eye contact. "We're prepared to offer what we should have given you in the first place. Respect, authority, and trust," she said. Marcus opened the folder. Equity stake increased to 20%. Voting rights majority within 12 months. Governance charter rewritten to include anti-discrimination triggers. Board oversight now including 3 civil rights leaders nominated by Marcus. No NDAs, no silencing. He closed the folder and looked up. "This isn't about ego, Sandra. This is about setting a national precedent." She nodded. "We know. That's why the board unanimously supports it." Meanwhile, the media frenzy exploded. Marcus's rise had become a case study in modern corporate warfare. Forbes ran a profile titled "The Man Who Rewrote the Rules of Power." Harvard Business School invited him to keynote their ethics summit. Law schools began teaching the SkyWest case as a benchmark in systemic discrimination litigation. But not everyone was cheering. Bradley Wellington from his holding cell launched a countersuit claiming wrongful termination, alleging that his decades of service were erased by social media hysteria and racial pressure tactics. His legal team framed Marcus as a political opportunist, weaponizing identity for profit. Marcus didn't respond directly. Instead, he released internal SkyWest memos, verified and time-stamped, showing years of racist passenger reassignments, explicit emails requesting optics filtering, and a 20-to-1 document titled "Seat Appearance Optimization," authored by Bradley himself. Public sentiment swung further in Marcus' favor, but the biggest shift came when other victims of corporate discrimination began speaking out. At least 14 professionals, pilots, bankers, doctors came forward with eerily similar stories of being removed from seats, denied service, or scrutinized on flights across America. Marcus's battle had unlocked a wave of silent testimonies. And yet the threat wasn't over. Late that night, James entered Marcus's office with a grim expression. "We've intercepted chatter. Bradley's allies, some still inside SkyWest, are preparing a data dump. Fake audio clips, edited videos, all designed to paint you as a radical destabilizer. They're going to try to destroy your credibility before the Senate hearing." Marcus didn't flinch. Then we get ahead of it. Within hours, his team rolled out a new campaign, Truth Before Tactics. The microsite showcased authenticated footage, affidavits, data logs, and sworn testimonies. More importantly, it invited other professionals of color to submit their own travel discrimination stories. The response was overwhelming. Thousands poured in, each echoing Marcus' experience. At dawn, Marcus sat alone in his office overlooking the city. He remembered his mother's voice. "One day you'll have to decide, do you want to fit into the world as it is or fight for the world as it should be?" He smiled softly. He had made his choice. By mid-morning, the SkyWest scandal had shifted from a corporate nightmare to a national reckoning. The New York Times ran a front-page editorial titled "The Price of Prejudice at 35,000 Feet," calling Marcus Daniels' case the most significant civil rights corporate confrontation since in the 90s. Civil rights leaders, senators, and labor unions voiced support. School teachers taught the story as a modern-day parable of standing up to institutional abuse. And across the country, people were watching, waiting to see what Marcus would do next. Inside Pinnacle's command center, Marcus sat at the head of the table with his executive team. The screen behind him showed polling data. Aisha Robinson explained 58% of Americans say they have personally witnessed or experienced some form of discrimination while flying. James added 32% are now demanding a national passenger bill of rights. That number was 6% before you took your seat in row 34. Marcus leaned back. So now the question is, how do we turn momentum into mandate? He wasn't interested in symbolic apologies or shallow gestures. He wanted institutional change, permanent protections embedded in policy, not just PR. Sandra Reeves texted, "The board is ready for full governance transfer. Draft is in your inbox." Marcus didn't reply. He was already reviewing the final documents. But as he scrolled through the terms, something gave him pause. SkyWest still wanted him to sign a limited liability clause, protecting the company from future lawsuits related to discriminatory incidents uncovered during his tenure. James looked over Marcus' shoulder. This is them trying to contain the fallout. You sign that they wash their hands of the past. Marcus nodded. Then we strike it. Completely. Moments later, he called Sandra directly. No limits, no protections. If you want reform, it starts with truth. All of it. She didn't argue. Understood, I'll have legal revise. But while Marcus was negotiating systemic change, Bradley Wellington was busy preparing for war. Even from jail, he remained resourceful. His allies in corporate media began planning op-eds that questioned Marcus' motives. Anonymous executives claimed that Marcus had engineered the incident for clout. A prominent business pundit on cable TV referred to him as the new Al Sharpton of finance. Marcus, unfazed, gave a rare interview to PBS NewsHour, choosing a quieter, more thoughtful platform. I didn't ask to be a symbol, he said calmly. I asked for water. I asked for the seat I paid for. But the system chose to show me its true face that day. I'm simply making sure it remembers mine. That night, Sandra called again. This time, her voice was tight. Marcus, there's been another incident. She sent over surveillance footage. A Sky Westgate agent had forcibly removed a black couple from a business-class queue at LAX, demanding to see their tickets 3 times while white passengers walked through unchallenged. The couple, both attorneys, had already filed a formal complaint. Marcus watched the clip in silence, then looked at Aisha. Get them on the phone. Offer legal support. Invite them to testify at the Senate hearing. The timing couldn't have been more critical. Marcus was scheduled to appear before the Senate Commerce Committee in 48 hours, and Bradley Wellington had just filed a formal affidavit accusing Marcus of weaponizing racial politics to secure undue corporate influence. Wellington's attorneys claimed the investment agreement was obtained under duress and cited social media pressure as extortion by viral narrative. But they had no idea what Marcus was preparing. The next morning, his team released a 200-page dossier titled Patterns of Prejudice, a SkyWest internal review. It included employee testimonies, suppressed complaints, deleted HR records, and anonymized passenger feedback. But the centerpiece was an internal Slack transcript showing Bradley giving real-time instructions during Marcus' flight, keep the seat open. Whitley doesn't sit next to those types. Daniels will cave once security shows up. The leak exploded across the media. SkyWest stock dropped another 9%, and Washington, D.C. took notice. 2 senators issued joint statements calling for federal hearings into racial bias in airline operations. Meanwhile, Marcus's inbox flooded with support pilots, gate agents, even executives from other carriers who admitted privately that similar discrimination occurred within their own walls. Then came the subpoena. Bradley Wellington was officially under federal investigation not just for discrimination, but for financial crimes, sabotage, and falsifying internal security protocols. Marcus knew what this meant. It wasn't just his fight anymore. He stood at the center of a storm that was rewriting the rules of accountability for every major corporation in America. As he sat quietly in his office that evening, James entered. The DOJ just confirmed they're using your case to open a wider civil rights inquiry into aviation. Marcus closed his laptop. The battle had started with a seat, but now it was about an entire industry. Marcus Daniels entered the U.S. Senate chamber with the quiet composure of a man who had already won the moral war, even if the legal and financial battles were still raging. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and across the marble halls of Capitol Hill, lobbyists and corporate executives braced for the impact his testimony might bring. He wore a charcoal gray suit, not flashy but immaculately tailored his armor for the day. The chairwoman of the Senate Commerce Committee, Senator Elaine Cortez from New Jersey, banged the gavel sharply. This hearing will come to order. Today we are addressing systemic discrimination in commercial aviation, particularly in relation to the viral SkyWest Airlines incident involving Mr. Marcus Daniels. Marcus was sworn in. Sitting at the long wooden table before the panel of senators, he placed his prepared remarks in front of him but did not read them. Instead, he spoke from memory. Senators, I come before you not just as a CEO or investor, but as a son of a woman who worked 3 jobs so that I could one day sit in rooms like this. I've built companies, managed billions in capital, mentored over 200 minority professionals in finance. But on Flight 1876, none of that mattered, because someone with institutional power decided I didn't belong. The chamber was silent. He continued, "They didn't question my boarding pass because of an error. They questioned it because of who was holding it. And when I objected, they didn't seek clarity, they called security." Senator Cortez leaned forward. "Mr. Daniels, your case has sparked national outcry. But many of the airline executives we've spoken to claim these are isolated incidents. Do you believe what happened to you was unique?" "No," Senator Marcus replied. "It was filmed. That's the only thing unique about it." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Senator Whitmore from Texas, known for corporate-friendly policies, raised an eyebrow. "You're a successful man, Mr. Daniels. Why not just walk away and invest somewhere else? Why pursue this as a crusade?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Because when I walk away, they replace me with someone more compliant, someone they can control, and the next black passenger with a first-class ticket gets humiliated all over again. This isn't a crusade. It's damage control for a system that refuses to fix itself until it's forced." By now, clips of Marcus's testimony were being clipped and shared across social media. The phrase "filmed, not unique" began trending globally. But outside the chamber, Bradley Wellington was assembling his final defense. Despite his termination and pending charges, Bradley had influential allies: former CEOs, political donors, defense attorneys with decades of experience fighting civil rights lawsuits. His last gamble was to reframe the narrative entirely, not as a corporate scandal, but as an overreach of activist finance and trial by public shaming. He released a self-produced video interview on a major conservative news network. "This isn't about race," Bradley insisted, seated in a dark-paneled study. "This is about power. Marcus Daniels wants to control SkyWest. He's leveraging cancel culture to install himself as kingmaker in our industry. Is that what corporate America wants, CEOs with social agendas instead of fiduciary responsibilities?" For some, the message resonated, but for many more, it reeked of desperation. Marcus didn't respond directly to the video. He didn't need to. The facts were already speaking louder than Bradley ever could. The federal case was moving quickly. Lisa Corman's recording of Bradley offering her a promotion in exchange for perjury had gone viral after it was aired on 60 Minutes. The FBI had compiled evidence of multiple coordinated threats, planted files, and even attempts to fabricate Marcus's financial improprieties. Meanwhile, Sandra Reeves, now SkyWest's interim CEO, was quietly cooperating with federal investigators. Her statement confirmed what Marcus had alleged all along. Bradley had orchestrated passenger reshuffling based on appearance, specifically instructing staff to prioritize certain VIPs over paying first-class customers, particularly black and brown passengers. The phrase "seat reclamation protocol" became another national flashpoint. Marcus's Corporate Accountability Foundation released a public dossier showing that 8 other airlines had similar unwritten policies buried in operational memos. Phrases like comfort prioritization, passenger optics, and invisible tiering. The Justice Department launched a sweeping investigation into discriminatory practices across the aviation sector. But Marcus wasn't content with exposure alone. He wanted consequences and reform. He met with regulators and proposed a new federal mandate, the Air Passenger Dignity Act, a proposed bill that would prohibit racial profiling in passenger seating, require transparency in upgrades and removals, mandate diversity training with federal oversight, create a passenger complaint database accessible to the public, enforce multi-million-dollar penalties for discriminatory practices. The bill gained in momentum, attracting bipartisan support in an election year when consumer justice had become a defining issue. As the legislation moved through the Senate, Marcus received an unexpected message. The White House had requested a private meeting. 2 days later, he sat in the Roosevelt Room with the president's senior advisors, outlining the case not just for the bill, but for a new era of ethical capitalism. "We can't regulate prejudice out of existence," Marcus said, "but we can make it costlier to maintain than it is to eliminate." That single sentence was quoted in headlines around the country. It became a business school case study, a slogan, a movement. As the legislative process accelerated, Marcus quietly resumed his investment activities at Pinnacle. But now every term sheet included a new clause: companies receiving capital from Pinnacle must implement documented anti-discrimination protocols across customer service hiring and board recruitment. Within weeks, companies adjusted, not out of guilt, out of necessity. Marcus had changed the rules of the game. The arrest came just after sunrise. Federal agents surrounded a gated property on the outskirts of Denver Bradley Wellington's vacation estate. Dressed in Navy windbreakers marked FBI, they executed a sealed indictment with cold efficiency. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Aerial drones streamed footage to newsrooms across the country. Inside, Bradley stood in a silk robe and loafers, his jaw slack, watching as his gates burst open. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. But the country did. The charges read like a corporate crime thriller: sire, fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy, falsification of federal documents, misuse of privileged corporate information, and violations of civil rights law under Title 42. His concealed stake in Clearview Securities was at the center of it all, an espionage for profit scheme run out of Sky West's executive suite. The DOJ press conference that followed made national headlines. "This is not just an isolated bad actor," the Attorney General stated. "This is systemic rot at the top of a publicly traded company, and we are pursuing this case as such." Marcus Daniels watched the press conference from his office at Pinnacle's newly opened DC satellite headquarters. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just exhaled slowly. The battle had cost him nearly everything: time, security, his company's market value, and his family's privacy. But justice, long delayed, had finally shifted from possibility to reality. By midday, SkyWest board released a public statement fully severing ties with all executives implicated in discriminatory practices and corporate misconduct. They weren't doing it out of conscience. They were doing it to survive. Marcus, meanwhile, had moved on to the next stage of his strategy: institutional transformation. That same afternoon, he met with the CEOs of 5 other airlines behind closed doors at a private aviation summit in Seattle. It was the first meeting of its kind, one initiated not by the FAA or Congress, but by a private investor whose viral moment had forced the hand of an entire industry. The room was tense. "What exactly are you asking of us?" one executive asked cautiously. "I'm not asking," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm offering. You saw what happened to SkyWest. The difference between survival and collapse is transparency. Voluntarily implement the reforms in the Air Passenger Dignity Act, and my foundation will partner with you on a public trust campaign. Fight this, and we'll bring every discriminatory practice to light, one airline at a time." The CEOs looked around the room. They understood. The rules had changed. By the end of the day, 4 out of 5 airlines signed in non-binding letters of cooperation. The 5th, after a call from their largest institutional investor, who happened to be Pinnacle, signed 48 hours later. Across the industry, change began to ripple. Marcus wasn't done. He redirected $50 million of Pinnacle's quarterly surplus to fund a new nationwide coalition, Equity in Transit, a watchdog organization composed of legal experts, civil rights activists, former regulators, and retired airline executives, all committed to monitoring discrimination in public and private transportation. They launched with a real-time mobile app where passengers could report incidents, submit video evidence, and track complaints by airline, airport, or route. It went viral within days. But amid the public momentum, a deeper reckoning was happening in private. Marcus's mother, Evelyn Daniels, had remained mostly out of sight since the incident. Now in her 70s, she had chosen quiet dignity over public appearances. But she watched everything. One night, Marcus flew to Chicago and visited her small brick home on the city's south side, the place where it had all begun. "You changed the world," she said softly as he poured her tea. "No, Mama," he replied. "I just refuse to let it change me." She placed her hand on his. "You've always been that boy who asked why. Why not me? Why not us? You never stopped asking." Tears welled in Marcus' eyes, not from exhaustion or anger, but from the long, slow release of a lifetime of silence finally broken. "I couldn't have done it without you," he whispered. She smiled. "You already did it. The rest of us are just catching up." Meanwhile, in legal chambers, far removed from headlines, Bradley Wellington's legal team attempted damage control. They proposed a plea deal in exchange for cooperation. The prosecutors rejected the first offer. But then a surprise twist emerged. Documents seized from Bradley's home included damning evidence implicating executives from 2 major airport security contractors, Companies that had worked with SkyWest to reassign passengers flagged by profile-based targeting software. It wasn't just seat assignments, it was boarding priority, security clearance, even TSA screening levels. The scandal widened. Congress issued subpoenas. The DOJ launched a separate investigation. And suddenly, Marcus's battle wasn't just about airlines, it was about an entire ecosystem of silent bias embedded into aviation infrastructure. News anchors began calling it the Daniels effect on business shows, on political roundtables, even in law schools where students dissected the pivotal court filings that had shaped the public narrative. Back at Pinnacle, James Chen Aisha Robinson and the rest of Marcus' executive team had turned the company into a force of systemic leverage. Under Marcus's direction, Pinnacle had instituted new ESG standards, environmental, social, and governance metrics that now included equity enforcement clauses. Companies that didn't meet the benchmarks were cut. Those that did were rewarded with long-term capital and advisory support. Wall Street noticed. Other investment firms followed. It wasn't charity, it was future-proofing. In private, Marcus reflected on it all the years of coded language, backhanded compliments, double standards, and exceptionalism that masked discrimination behind civility. He'd outlasted it, and now he was rewriting the terms of engagement. The next quarterly earnings call at Pinnacle set a new record. But Marcus didn't mention profits. He mentioned Heather Stevens. He mentioned Lisa Corman. He mentioned the passengers whose videos sparked the truth. And then he said this: "We can't change what happened to us, but we can make sure it never happens to someone else again, not on our watch, not with our capital, and not in our silence." He ended the call there. No applause, just purpose. Marcus Daniels stood in front of a congressional subcommittee, the Capitol dome casting a long shadow through the windows behind him. The hearing room was filled to capacity: journalist aides, CEOs, civil rights leaders. His testimony, requested under the banner of National Transportation Equity Reform, had become the most anticipated political event of the season. Mr. Daniels' chairwoman Cortez said, her voice steady, "You've been called here not only because of what happened to you, but because of what you did afterward. We want to understand how systemic discrimination can be challenged through economic leverage and what Congress can do to support structural change." Marcus nodded and began. "Madam Chair, members of this committee, I'm not here because I wanted to be. I'm here because I was removed from a seat I purchased on a flight to finalize a $120 million deal because someone in power decided I didn't look like I belonged there." He paused, "But I stayed in that seat long enough to realize the incident wasn't about me. It was about a system, quiet, procedural, and deeply embedded, that teaches certain people they're always one polite excuse away from being pushed out." He then submitted over 200 pages of documentation, internal memos, digital correspondence, HR complaints, and testimonies compiled through his foundation's Equity in Transit initiative. The record showed patterns across airlines, airports, and even security firms. One congressman tried to pivot. "Mr. Daniels, would you characterize your response as retaliation or activism?" Marcus didn't flinch. If telling the truth with receipts is retaliation, then maybe truth should come with a warning label. The room stilled. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a vision for accountability that included a federal oversight board for transportation discrimination cases, mandatory bias audits tied to federal contracts, whistleblower protections for flight crew and employees, passenger Bill of Rights legislation with enforcement teeth. By the end, even his political skeptics were scribbling notes. After the hearing, Chairwoman Cortez approached him privately. "You just rewrote the narrative," she said. "Not just about airlines, but about how power can and must be challenged." Marcus nodded. "Thank you. But I'm not finished." Later that week, the Corporate Accountability Foundation launched its most ambitious initiative, yet an open access database of every discrimination complaint filed against U.S. transportation companies in the past 10 years, cross-referenced by location, resolution, and repeat offenders. The tool went live with thousands of entries, each verified and anonymized for privacy. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about transparency. Meanwhile, SkyWest struggled to recover. Although Bradley Wellington was gone, the stain of his leadership lingered. Several board members were quietly replaced. Dozens of new hires reshaped middle management. But Marcus knew better than to accept surface change. So through his board seat and governance authority, he pushed for something deeper. Every executive bonus at SkyWest was now tied to measurable progress on diversity metrics. Every customer service complaint triggered a compliance review. Every passenger ejection was recorded and independently evaluated for bias. The results were undeniable. Within 2 quarters, complaints dropped by 47%. Employee retention among minority staff rose 33%. SkyWest's public trust index, once plummeting, recovered to its pre-scandal levels. But while SkyWest tried to reform, Bradley Wellington tried to disappear. Indicted and awaiting trial, he had relocated to a private estate in the Caribbean. But that didn't stop investigative journalists from finding him. A documentary team secured an exclusive interview, one Marcus chose not to watch. "I've moved on," he told Aisha. "Let the world deal with him now." Instead, Marcus turned his attention to something far more lasting: succession. He began mentoring a new cohort of Black and brown executives, hosting quarterly retreats at Pinnacle's campus. He shared everything: strategy, negotiation, how to wield leverage without losing one's soul. One of his mentees, a young Latina analyst named Carla Mendez, asked him at the end of one session, "How did you stay calm on that flight?" "I would have exploded." Marcus looked at her, then said, "I didn't stay calm. I stayed strategic. Outrage is fuel, but strategy is the engine." The line became a mantra for the cohort. Meanwhile, media narratives continued to shift. Forbes ran a cover story, "The Leverage of Dignity: How Marcus Daniels Changed Boardroom Accountability." Harvard Business Review followed with "When Investors Become Activists: A New Model of Capitalism." But not all headlines were celebratory. On fringe networks, commentators painted Marcus as a corporate insurgent. A few tried reviving the disinformation campaign Bradley had seeded. But by now, the facts were too overwhelming, the evidence too ironclad, and the public too aware. The Department of Justice announced an expanded civil rights task force, citing Marcus's case as a model for reform-driven enforcement. Airlines quietly adjusted their internal training programs. Consulting firms scrambled to update their compliance services. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. And yet Marcus remained grounded. He still called his mother every Sunday. He still took the subway to work once a week just to remember he'd say. He still preferred a glass of water to champagne. At a private event months later, a fellow investor remarked, "You could have cashed out and walked away. Instead, you walked into fire." Marcus replied with quiet resolve, "I didn't walk into fire. I walked through it, so no one else would have to." Outside that gala on a quiet New York street, a teenage boy approached him timidly. He wore a school uniform and carried a public policy textbook. "Mr. Daniels?" "Yes, my teacher showed us the video. The plane thing. I just wanted to say thank you, because now I know I'm not crazy. That stuff really happens." Marcus placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're awake. Stay that way." The boy nodded and ran off. Marcus stood there a moment longer, looking up at the skyline, the city lights blinking like distant stars. He had money. He had power. But more than that, he now had a legacy. 3 days after the congressional hearing, the Corporate Accountability Foundation received over 10,000 new submissions: employees, passengers, whistleblowers from across industries. Many came with receipts, emails, texts, photos, video clips. What began as one man's documentation of a humiliating flight had awakened a flood of quiet truths long buried under NDAs and silent exits. Marcus Daniels and his team set up a national response network. It wasn't enough to expose corruption; they would build infrastructure to defend against it. They hired 50 legal interns and 20 civil rights attorneys to vet and categorize the influx of cases. They partnered with data scientists to build predictive models, identifying which companies were most likely to foster discrimination based on policy gaps and complaint histories. They began publishing quarterly scorecards on corporate accountability, graded A to F. SkyWest, once an untouchable legacy airline, was now a case study in public reform and a B+ on the inaugural report. The press hailed the foundation as a new kind of regulator in the age of broken trust. Meanwhile, Marcus was summoned to a private meeting with the White House Chief of Staff. They met in the Roosevelt Room, where the air still carried the weight of war plans and policy revolutions. The chief was direct. "The president watched your hearing twice," he said. "We want your help designing a national framework for transportation equity." Marcus didn't blink. "Then you'll need more than token input. You'll need veto power embedded in the room. The chief of staff studied him for a long moment before nodding. Done. From that day forward, Marcus became an unofficial architect behind what would soon be called the Passenger Dignity Act, a sweeping legislative package that tied federal transportation funds to civil rights compliance. It mandated independent oversight councils, required bias reporting systems, and enforced penalties for racial profiling across airlines, rail, and security operations. SkyWest wasn't the target anymore. They were now the example. Every other airline knew the clock was ticking to get ahead of the reforms. Back at Pinnacle Investments, Aisha Robinson, his COO, flagged a troubling development. Bradley's resurfaced, she said. His legal team is filing a civil countersuit alleging reputational damage, career sabotage, and unlawful interference. Marcus raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? On desperation, Aisha replied. The lawsuit was laughable on its merits but dangerous in its narrative. It wasn't aimed at winning, it was aimed at muddying the water. Designed for fringe outlets to say, see, both sides are at fault. Marcus met with James Chen, his general counsel. Do we squash it or counterattack? James didn't hesitate. We counter with everything. But we don't just defend, we expose. They assembled a war room not for defense, but for truth. Bradley's countersuit gave them legal pretext to introduce sealed evidence. Everything they'd gathered that hadn't made it into the public sphere yet, offshore accounts, false filings, a secondary network of discriminatory assignments that Bradley had quietly administered through executive assistants. Within 72 hours of discovery proceedings, Bradley's legal team withdrew the suit. Privately, they offered settlement. Marcus declined. I don't want a check. I want the truth in daylight. That truth came weeks later in a front-page expose in the Washington Post revealing Bradley's secret cabin profile lists documents, flagging passengers by perceived risk factors, which included skin tone, last name origin, and non-English accents. The backlash was instant and nuclear. SkyWest stock dropped another 15%. The Department of Transportation referred the case to the DJ's Civil Rights Division. Bradley was subpoenaed for grand jury testimony. Marcus had never raised his voice. He never made it personal. And yet, piece by piece, the empire that tried to erase him was falling into ruin because the facts spoke louder than rage. But not all battles were won in courtrooms or boardrooms. One evening, Marcus visited his mother's old apartment building in South Chicago. The lobby still smelled of dust and bleach. Kids played in the stairwell, just like he once did. He met with the new community council, a mix of single mothers, retired veterans, and student activists. We saw you on TV, one of them said. Never thought someone from here would be in Congress boardrooms and prime time all in the same month. Marcus smiled. Change doesn't start in Washington. It starts here. He wrote a check to fully fund their neighborhood redevelopment plan, schools, safe transit access, small business incubators. It was barely a drop in Pinnacle's portfolio, but it meant everything here. As he left, a teenager stopped him at the gate. Yo, you that dude from the plane. Marcus nodded. You didn't just win, the teen said. You changed the game. That night, Marcus sat alone in his hotel suite looking out over the skyline. A bottle of bourbon on the table. The city humming beneath him. He didn't feel like a victor. He felt like a custodian of a moment, of a mission. He knew there were thousands more fights ahead, quiet acts of exclusion in polished rooms. But for now, he had one thing they could never strip from him. Not money, not power, but credibility earned in silence, proven in pressure, and forged in the fire of public scrutiny, and that he knew was the beginning of real change. Marcus Daniels returned to Washington under a different banner. No longer merely a finance titan, he had become something more enduring, a living case study in how power, when held with clarity and discipline, could confront corruption and remake the rules. And now those rules were being drafted with his fingerprints on every clause. At the heart of Capitol Hill, the final text of the Passenger Dignity Act was taking shape. The Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Safety had requested Marcus's presence for one last round of consultations. Unlike his earlier testimonies, which had been adversarial reactive, this was proactive, constructive. He wasn't pleading for justice anymore. He was defining it. Inside the chamber, aides jotted notes as Marcus broke down the core pillars: independent oversight with teeth, bias audits, with public transparency, real-time complaint, tracking, and whistleblower protection codified with immunity guarantees. He spoke not as an angry man, but as an architect, a strategist, a survivor of corporate violence, repurposing his pain into policy. When he finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, not performative but solemn, the kind reserved for moments that would one day be quoted in textbooks. Later that day, Marcus received a call from the Secretary of Transportation. "You've done more to reform airline accountability in 6 months than we've managed in 2 decades." Marcus didn't bask in the compliment. "Then let's make it last for 100 years." As political allies rallied behind the act, corporate lobbyists launched their counteroffensive. An airline consortium poured $40 million into ad campaigns warning that the law would cripple consumer choice and open floodgates to lawsuits. Former executives, shadow firms, and industry PR machines waged their own disinformation war. Marcus, unfazed, doubled down. He partnered with civil rights groups and economic justice organizations to create a media blitz of his own. But instead of fear-mongering, he used storytelling featuring testimonials from those discriminated against, victims of silent rerouting, passengers denied boarding without cause. The stories spread like wildfire across digital platforms. A pivotal turning point came when Heather Stevens and Lisa Corman, the whistleblowing flight attendants, appeared together on Good Morning America. Their interview articulate measured and heartbreaking cemented public opinion. Trust swung away from the airlines and toward the movement. Bradley Wellington, now formally indicted, watched the interview from a federal holding facility. His trial date loomed, and his lawyers scrambled to suppress recordings and documents now in the DOJ's possession. Marcus didn't speak of him anymore, not out of fear, but irrelevance. Bradley had become what he feared most, a footnote. Meanwhile, SkyWest underwent seismic changes. Sandra Reeves had transitioned from interim to full CEO. Her first act was to invite Marcus Daniels to lead the newly formed Ethics Council, not as a favor, but as a mandate contractually binding under their restructured board governance. The council included former passengers, disability advocates, civil rights attorneys, and a data ethics team. Their mission wasn't just to clean house, but to build a replicable system every airline would one day adopt. Marcus insisted on quarterly public reports, open board meetings, and real-time accountability dashboards. Some investors balked. Marcus welcomed it. "If transparency spooks you," he told them during the annual shareholder meeting, "you were never building for the future. You were hiding from it." Meanwhile, the Corporate Accountability Foundation expanded rapidly. With grants pouring in from progressive firms and high-profile philanthropists, it opened satellite offices in Atlanta, Oakland, and Houston. They trained over 2,000 corporate monitors and created the nation's first anti-discrimination corporate audit certification modeled after food safety standards. Everywhere Marcus went, people greeted him differently now, not just with reverence, but with relief, as if someone had finally given voice to what they'd endured in silence. One moment stood out in particular. At Reagan National Airport, a black TSA agent paused mid-scan to nod subtly. "Appreciate what you're doing, Mr. Daniels. We see it." Marcus didn't reply aloud. He nodded back. Back in Chicago, Marcus visited his high school. They had named the new STEM building after him. But what moved him most wasn't the plaque, it was the student body president, a quiet black girl named Janelle, who introduced him at the dedication. When they pushed Mr. Daniels out of that seat, she said they didn't realize they were pushing him into history. The audience stood for 5 full minutes. That night, Marcus returned home. No headlines, no cameras. Just bourbon silence in the skyline. He opened a letter from Elijah Washington, his mentor. The old professor had watched everything from afar, too ill now to travel but sharp as ever. The letter read, "You've done what we all dreamed of but never fully achieved. You turned your pain into principle and then into policy. That's legacy, not in buildings, in people." As Marcus folded the letter, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt ready, not for rest, but for what came next. The sun rose over Capitol Hill with a strange quiet. Outside the offices of Pinnacle Investments' DC branch, a line of reporters had already formed. Not for Marcus Daniels this time, but for the growing roster of voices joining him. His movement had reached the tipping point. What began as a personal defense had ignited a firestorm of systemic scrutiny. And now Marcus was no longer the only one holding the flame. That morning, 8 additional whistleblowers from different airlines, JetEast, Trans-American Coastline, released statements echoing the discrimination patterns exposed at SkyWest. Similar phrases emerged: preferred passenger reassignments, passenger profiling, and most chillingly, seat comfort algorithms weighted by racial heuristics. Marcus stood before a wall of screens in the command center. Each screen mapped real-time media traffic, social sentiment, whistleblower activity, investor positioning, and DOJ responses. Across the data, one message repeated: "This isn't just about SkyWest anymore." James Chen, legal counsel, leaned over a tablet. "Marcus, the DOJ wants to convene a roundtable. They're proposing the creation of a permanent airline oversight commission, and they want you to serve as founding chair." Marcus exhaled. If they're serious, they'll need teeth in that commission. Subpoena power, audit rights, enforcement budget. They're open to all of it. Because frankly, James gestured towards a monitor tracking airline stocks. They've realized you're the only person who can calm the market and fix the problem. Meanwhile, the SEC finalized its review of SkyWest compliance filings. Multiple irregularities emerged. Marcus had flagged these inconsistencies months earlier, but now they were headline news. Suspicious transactions linked to Bradley's offshore accounts revealed deeper financial manipulation than anyone had predicted. Insider trading, fake vendor contracts, and worst of all, kickback schemes tied to passenger routing logistics. The evidence exposed a culture not just of racial bias, but of profit from prejudice. Sandra Reeves, now CEO of SkyWest, requested a private meeting. They met not in an office or boardroom, but at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Marcus stood quietly reading the carved words, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Sandra approached solemnly. "I know what we've done," she began. "I've spent weeks combing through internal files. It's worse than I thought." Marcus said nothing. "I've begun terminating every executive with direct ties to discriminatory practices. I've launched a reparations program for passengers who were wrongfully downgraded, denied service, or profiled. I'm not asking for credit, I'm just asking what comes next." Marcus turned to her. "What comes next is a model. A model. You're going to set the standard for the entire industry. You're going to pilot the first ethical service framework for commercial aviation. And you're going to do it transparently. Public dashboards, external audits. Every customer complaint tracked, resolved, and published." Sandra nodded slowly. "Understood." The Corporate Accountability Foundation released its first industry report the same week. It ranked every major airline by transparency, equity practices, incident resolutions, and board diversity. SkyWest was listed with an asterisk under restructuring following civil rights violations. But another name topped the list: Pinnacle Airlines, a regional startup backed by Marcus himself. Launched quietly in the background, Pinnacle Airlines had already signed contracts with 5 key regional hubs. Its business model: 100% ethical service transparency, zero tolerance for discrimination, and incentives tied directly to customer dignity scores. It was more than competition. It was a challenge. Bradley Wellington, still awaiting trial, tried one last media appearance. In a thinly veiled rant during a jailhouse interview, he accused Marcus of building a surveillance state in the skies. The comment backfired. Social media exploded with clips of Marcus simply stating accountability is not surveillance. It's justice with eyes open. Meanwhile, Congress passed the Passenger Dignity Act with bipartisan support. Airline lobbyists fought tooth and nail, but public pressure was overwhelming. Protesters, advocates, celebrities, and veterans testified in support of the bill. Marcus never returned to the Capitol to celebrate. He was too busy at a training session. At a SkyWest hub in Atlanta, he led a workshop for new recruits, mostly young Black Latinos and Asian American trainees, many of whom had never seen someone like Marcus in a position of authority within aviation. "I'm not here to give a speech," he began. "I'm here to remind you you're not just here to fly planes or serve drinks. You're here to represent justice in a space where it once didn't exist." A young trainee raised her hand. "Sir, how did you not give up?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then answered, "Because every time I was told I didn't belong, I made a plan. Not just to stay, but to rebuild the room they tried to throw me out of." Outside the terminal, passengers lined up for a newly launched, equity-verified SkyWest route. The flight had diverse crews on board, sensitivity AI monitoring, and live reporting grievance protocols. One elderly Black passenger smiled as she took her seat. "Never thought I'd live to see this day," she whispered to her husband. Neither had Marcus, but he'd built it anyway. 3 months later, the headlines had shifted. What once screamed Black CEO removed from first class now read Marcus Daniels, Appointed to lead National Transportation Equity Board, FAA partners with Pinnacle to reform airline protocols. SkyWest's new anti-bias system becomes industry standard. But behind the headlines, the real work was just beginning. Marcus sat in a sunlit conference room atop the Department of Transportation's headquarters in Washington, D.C. The room was quiet, filled with leaders from every major airline, federal regulators, civil rights attorneys, and union representatives. On the screen behind him was a single phrase, the future of trust in the sky. He wasn't here to relive his story. He was here to change the system that had made it possible. I want to be clear. Marcus began scanning the room. This isn't about one company. This is about the culture of commercial aviation. For decades, first class has been more than a seat. It's been a symbol. And too often, that symbol excluded people who look like me. A hush fell over the room. He continued, "You've all seen the numbers. Complaints of discrimination in air travel have risen 37% in 5 years. Trust is broken, so let's rebuild it, not with slogans, with structure." Marcus then unveiled the Ethical Aviation Compact, a new federal framework requiring real-time passenger complaint dashboards, equity audits linked to licensing renewals, independent ombudsman offices at all major airports, diversity quotas in leadership and crew assignments, mandatory anti-bias flight simulations, and most radically, a clause stating that any airline with 3 verified discrimination cases within a fiscal year would face immediate suspension of first-class service privileges for 6 months. Some CEOs bristled. Others took notes, but no one dared dismiss him. The compact passed unanimously within the board and was adopted federally within the month. For the first time in aviation history, customer dignity was written into the regulatory DNA of air travel. Back in New York, Pinnacle Investments celebrated its strongest quarter in a decade. Not because of the SkyWest deal, which had since expanded, but because of the public trust Marcus had cultivated. Hundreds of minority-owned businesses had applied to join Pinnacle's ethical investment portfolio. Marcus used the momentum to launch the Daniels Trust, a $200 million fund to empower underrepresented entrepreneurs in the transportation, tech, and infrastructure sectors. Meanwhile, SkyWest was undergoing a quiet renaissance. With Sandra Reeves as permanent CEO and Heather Stevens now leading diversity operations, the company had regained public trust. Employee morale was up 40% and its customer retention was the highest in industry history. But not everything resolved cleanly. Bradley Wellington's trial revealed shocking testimony. He had paid private investigators to track Marcus' family. He had orchestrated the raid on Pinnacle HQ using falsified intel. He had not only corrupted the SkyWest board, but attempted to infiltrate federal review boards. The court sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison for obstruction of justice, corporate espionage, witness tampering, and civil rights violations. Walter Kingston, forced to testify against him, quietly accepted a 5-year ban from any public company board and disappeared from public life. At the sentencing, Marcus chose not to attend. He was on a different flight, this time not in first class, but seated beside a group of black high school interns from his foundation's new aviation mentorship program. They were on their way to tour NASA's aerospace engineering campus. The teenager beside him leaned over and asked Mr. Daniels, "Do you ever get tired of fighting all this?" Marcus looked out the window at the sky, quiet for a moment. "Every day," he said. "But I also remember what it used to feel like walking into rooms where nobody thought I should be there. And I promised myself 2 things. 1, I'd never let them push me out again. And 2, I'd hold the door open long enough for you to walk in too." The boy nodded slowly. "That's exactly what my mom said about you. She cried when the airline changed their policies. Said someone finally listened." Marcus smiled softly. "Then it's working." As the plane reached cruising altitude, he closed his eyes just for a moment. Not because the fight was over, but because the next battle would be fought with laws, with policies, and with power used the right way. In boardrooms, in classrooms, in courtrooms, and yes, even in the skies. Because systems don't change on their own. People change them. And Marcus Daniels had just shown America exactly how. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.